Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. The program is Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on Conservative Talk Radio. And you are listening to AFR Talk, the American Family Radio Talk Network, the most feared and dangerous radio network in all of America. I want to begin by talking about the results of a poll that the Pew Research Center released. Now, this is a research center that leans to the left politically. They're not friends of the conservative movement or the pro-family movement. But it's an interesting poll when you address the issue of whether this is a Christian nation. Every time I say that we are a Christian nation, I just get a blizzard, a buzzsaw of criticism and reaction on Facebook and on Twitter. And so, it's a legitimate question to ask, is this a Christian nation? Now, I contend by our founding, we are a Christian nation, that this was founded on Judeo-Christian principles, Judeo-Christian truth claims, Judeo-Christian moral standards. I think that's evident. I think that's obvious. There's no question about that. I've even had some liberal talk show hosts, like Tom Hartman was talking to him one time, made the claim that this was a Christian nation, and he challenged me on that. Then I said, well, Tom, clearly this nation was built and founded on Judeo-Christian principles, and he agreed with that. He, for some reason, doesn't want to call this a Christian nation, but he accepted my assertion that this was a nation that was founded on Judeo-Christian truth claims and principles. He agreed with that. Well, in my mind, that makes this a Christian nation from the very beginning. And then you've got this Supreme Court decision from 1892, Supreme Court decision. And again, to the left, a Supreme Court decision is like the Holy Grail for them. And here's what the Supreme Court said in 1892, the Church of the Holy Trinity versus the United States. These and many other matters which might be noticed add a volume of unofficial declarations to the mass of organic utterances that this is a Christian nation. Now, what the Supreme Court meant by organic utterances is these were utterances by governments. These were utterances that were made by government officials speaking on behalf of the government with the authority of government at state, local, and county levels and national levels and so forth. These were organic utterances. It says you add all those together with all of these unofficial declarations, then what you get is this massive amount of evidence that this is a Christian nation. So that is our quote for the day. This is the United States Supreme Court. This is the Holy Grail for people on the left. This is the ultimate authority in their mind. Whatever the Supreme Court says, that's what you got to do. They speak the truth. They're the Oracle of Delphi. Well, here is the United States Supreme Court saying, quote, this is a Christian nation, end quote. That's a Supreme Court ruling from 1892. That is the quote of the day. Supreme Court, 1892, this is a Christian nation. Now, this Pew Research poll confirms that even today, I think you could make the argument that this even today is a Christian nation. And what Pew Research has done is identified the levels of religious affiliation in the United States. They did this with Singapore, they did it with France, they did it with Iran, and they did it with the United States. Now, I'm not concerned about the other countries, but here are their results, their findings when it came to religious affiliation in the United States. 78% of Americans are Christians. They are self-identified Christians. If they have to pick a tradition with which they are affiliated, a religion with which they are affiliated, and again, we're not saying, and nobody would pretend that 78% of the American people are dedicated, devoted followers of Jesus Christ, but by their own self-identification, they are Christians. Now, a lot of them may be nominal. They may be Christian and Easter Christians. They may have not darkened the door of a church for years, but if they're asked, this is how they identify themselves, 78% of the American people. And so you think, okay, well, that still leaves 22%. So Which is the next most favored religion in the United States? Well, the next biggest classification are those that are called unaffiliated. That's 16%, unaffiliated. That is, they don't affiliate in any specific way with a Christian church or Christian denomination. Now, a lot of these people would consider themselves to be spiritual people, that they're spiritually inclined. They might be into Eastern mysticism or some kind of very vague do-it-yourself kind of religious deal. So they would consider themselves religiously unaffiliated. Some of them will be atheists. Some of them will be agnostics. Others will consider themselves spiritual rather than religious. Okay, so that gets us up to 94% of the people. You look at the other religions, the religion that has the next highest number of adherents is Judaism at 2%. 2% of the American population identifies as Jewish. You get down to the other religions, Buddhism is 1.2%. Islam is less than 1%. Hinduism, 0.6%. Folk and traditional religions, 0.2%. So remember that one of the significant takeaways here, there are more Buddhists in the United States than there are Muslims. Most people don't know that. I didn't know that till I read the results of this survey. Buddhists are 1.2% of our population, but this is a very significant thing. Muslims are 0.9% of the population. Less than 1% of the population in the United States identifies as Islam. And you think about how much clout they have, how much power they have, how much ability they have to intimidate and to harass on the grounds that we're being Islamophobic. I mean, they have a power and a clout in America that's far out of proportion even to the power and the clout that the gay lobby has. You know, the gay lobby, they're like 4% max of the population, and yet they're running this country. They got the power to get rid of a CEO of one of the leading high-tech firms in the world, Mozilla. They can run him out of town in a matter of a couple of days. They have enormous power and enormous clout. But anyway, to get back to the main premise here, I think you can make the case. I mean, in fact, Pew Research makes the case this is a Christian nation. 78% of us identify as Christian, 16% unaffiliated, next highest Judaism at less than 2%, 1.8%. And here's what Pew says. Again, this is a research outfit that leans to the left, grouping all Christians into a single category, which again is perfectly reasonable depending on what one is trying to measure, points to the fact that despite nominal diversity, we're essentially a Christian nation. We are essentially a Christian nation. Exactly what the Supreme Court said in 1892. Now, a couple of other items here that are interesting. You know, there are 16% of Americans that are unaffiliated. We just saw that from the Pew Research people. And there has definitely been a decline in the number of Americans who claim religious affiliation. You know, in 1990, there were only 8% of Americans who had no significant religion or had no religious affiliation. You know, that number is double today to where, according to Pew, it's 16% have no religious affiliation. MIT Technology Review says 18%, so somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 25 million people, and that's less than it was 2 decades ago. It's almost double the number of people who do not have religious affiliation. Now, this article from the Daily Mail, and this might be something that I'd be interested in getting your reactions to, maybe your calls on, and I'll tell you here in just a second what we're going to take the majority of our calls on today. But the question is why? Why has that happened? Now, this article in the Daily Mail thinks it could be correlated to internet use. Now, I don't think this is the answer. I don't think it's the explanation. But what they have discovered is a correlation between rapid increased use of the internet and a decline in religious affiliation. And so they think, well, you know, back in the 1980s, internet use was virtually non-existent, but in 2010, 53% of people who spent 2 hours online a week and 25% spent more than 7 hours. And then they immediately qualify it by saying, look, this is a correlation and it's not a causation. In other words, they may have nothing to do with each other. Increased internet usage may have nothing to do with the decline in religious fervor. So they make that point right deep buried in the article, although their lead title would lead you to suggest that the internet is what is responsible for the decline in faith. But this is the thing that this researcher said. Let me find his name. Guy by the name of Downey. Where's his first name? Alan Downey. He's a computer scientist at the Olin College of Engineering in Massachusetts. He's the one that discovered there is the significant correlation between increased internet use and declining religious faith. And there could be something to that. I mean, time that maybe we spent reading the Word, we now spend online. Time that we spent in prayer, we now spend online. Time that we maybe spent in church or at a Bible study or at a home cell group, we now spend online. So it's possible there is a connection. But Downey says the single biggest cause of religious affiliation is upbringing. Those who are raised in religious households much more likely to remain in their family's religion as adults. And I think he's onto it here. I think that's the number one correlation. You talk now about the number of people that are growing up in homes where there is no religious life. There's an absentee father, so there's no spiritual leader coming from the father of the home. And I think that's one of the reasons I think a father is by far the most influential figure in his family in terms of the religious affiliation of his children, far more important than a mom, especially for sons. I mean, if sons grow up in a home where mom goes to church and dad does not, then they think that Christianity is a religion for women and sissies. That's what they think, that real men like my dad don't have any use for Christianity. And so they've got a pretty big hurdle to overcome then to become affiliated and a devout follower of Christ as adults. So I still think that is clearly the most important factor. Be interested in your phone calls, whether you think the internet has some connection with the loss of religious fervor. 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. Also want to encourage you to go to our Focal Point Facebook page. Got the question is already up there. Jeb Bush, and we'll talk about this coming right out of the break. Jeb Bush wants to be our president in 2016. He says that crossing the border illegally, he says that illegal immigration, he says it's not a felony, it's an act of love. That is Jeb Bush talking about illegal immigration. It's an act of love. We ought to reward it. What do you think? Focal Point AFR Talk back in 2.